Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. A national treasure once sailed the seas, holding a mystery in its belly.
My grandfather once said that everyone would like to know the top speed, but Uncle Joe Stalin, he's not going to find out.
A clifftop complex that kept America at the cutting edge of a global technological revolution.
It's the very root of what we all carry in our pockets today. This is where it all began.
Towering structures that offer a rare glimpse into America's ancient past.
Where we're standing is the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas, the largest totally earthen mound built by ancient people in the Western Hemisphere.
And a frozen neighborhood, once a safe haven for thousands of Americans.
You could kind of work with people and meet with people and experience people in an environment that was non-judgmental of who you were.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures. Forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. In Philadelphia, a pinnacle of American engineering rusts in the Delaware River.
A lot of these piers have really fallen into disuse. But at one pier, you see this massive ship. It's not a cargo ship. It's sleek and trim. It's a passenger vessel. But it is in really poor shape.
On board is a labyrinth of corridors and hatches.
Inside is peeling paint, dead wires dangling from the ceiling. There are no distinguishing features to orientate yourself. Everything has been removed, including the interior walls.
This vessel is a diamond in the rough. It may be rusting, but beneath that grime, there's an amazing story.
This ship was once the most famous passenger liner in America, but few knew what was going on below deck.
These were top-drawer national secrets, highly classified by the Pentagon, and they weren't released to the public for decades.
The stories of this vessel have passed through the generations of one family. Susan Gibbs is the granddaughter of the man who built it.
The first time I came on board the ship, I was haunted a bit. It seemed like everyone had forgotten about the ship.
Today, the ship floats by the pier, unnoticed by most. But 50 years ago, it was the most luxurious American ocean liner on the seas, featuring a swimming pool, 2 bars, 2 theaters, and a place for the rich and famous to party.
We are entering the grand ballroom. You can imagine women in gowns and stoles and men in their dapper tuxedos and listening to the music, which would have been over there. Just would have been so magical.
The ship played host to all sorts of celebrities of the day. Salvador Dali, Duke Ellington, the Kennedys, even John Wayne.
This is the SS United States, a 50,000-ton steamship, the most sophisticated high-tech vessel of its day.
It was an absolute masterpiece of marine architecture, and it integrated all of the latest technologies that could make a ship sleek and fast and elegant.
If you look closer at the chimney stacks, you can see they have a very unusual design. These are pointed, almost like an aircraft's wing, but on its side. It's one of the many quirks of this vessel.
The stacks are part of a number of innovative design choices from the mind of one man from Pennsylvania, a man called William Francis Gibbs.
My grandfather was obsessed with ships since childhood, and even when he went on to Harvard to study, he would spend a lot of his time in his dorm room designing ships and neglecting his formal studies.
When he was still a student, Gibbs drew the design for what would become the SS United States. He called it his perfect ship.
My grandfather was very patriotic, and it was very annoying to him that the Europeans were excelling at ship design. And so part of his motivation was just to show that the United States of America could be the best.
By 1940, Gibbs had his own shipbuilding business and took an order that would have a profound influence on him for the rest of his life. He was tasked with building the nation's Liberty ships.
Liberty ships provided that vital lifeline of supplies that kept Britain alive until the U.S. could come in and help turn the tide of the war.
The Liberty ships were one of the great engineering success stories of the Second World War. Factories could churn out a 7,000-ton vessel in just 6 weeks.
At the close of the Second World War, Gibbs had produced over 5,000 warships, but his perfect vessel was still on the drawing board. In 1949, he shook hands on a deal to bring his dream to life.
Gibbs wanted to go back to building the beautiful, fast passenger liners that he'd built before the war. And he knew now he might get his chance to build his ultimate ship, his dream ship.
In 1950, his company started building the SS United States to the design he drew decades before, but with a few changes.
There is no wood anywhere on the ship because wood could burn, wood could set on fire, and my grandfather absolutely forbade that. This ship was going to be totally safe.
During the wars, Gibbs had learned that more sailors were lost to fire than to drowning. The only wood allowed on the ship was the cutting board in the kitchen and the Steinway piano in the ballroom.
He was obsessed with safety. He liked to say of the SS United States, you can't set her on fire, you can't sink her, you can't catch her.
But the biggest changes to the design were below deck, made to appease the ship's benefactor, the U.S. government.
Gibbs' idea was the government would help him fund this super fast ship for use as a luxury passenger liner, but it would also have a dual use. In an emergency, in a war, it could be converted into the fastest troop ship ever known.
Fundamental to this ship's impressive speed were its finely tuned engines.
We are now in the aft engine room of the SS United States. And this was one of my grandfather's absolutely favorite spots aboard the vessel. He loved bringing guests down and standing coins on their sides, sort of like this, and they would stay on their side to demonstrate the ship's lack of vibration, which was one of his great triumphs.
Gibbs also changed his design to accommodate an advanced series of watertight compartments. Each could be sealed in the event of a breach, ensuring a single torpedo couldn't sink the vessel.
There were just these elaborate mechanisms where from the bridge and from various points of the ship you could control the watertight doors throughout the vessel so that if there was ever a breach of fire or of water, it could be quickly localized. every single detail of the ship was just planned with such care. It's just extraordinary.
One aspect of Gibbs' design process was particularly pioneering.
The SS United States was designed to be the fastest passenger ship ever built. So we actually tested models of the ship in a wind tunnel to design a structure that would be as aerodynamic as possible. This was the first time this had ever been done for a ship.
The SS United States finally set sail on her maiden voyage in 1952.
She set off from New York City on July 3rd, and there was such a crowd, and the ticker tape, and just the commotion. There was such exuberance as she left New York and headed for Europe.
Adding to the excitement was talk that the ship was capable of setting a new world record for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic by a passenger ship.
The maiden voyage of the SS United States was extraordinary. The ship smashed the transatlantic speed record. Many passengers stayed up all night, the night that the record was broken, drinking and dancing up and down this deck where I'm sitting now in conga lines, drinking out of the bottle. I mean, just incredible festivities.
The ship went from the US to Great Britain in 3 days and 10 hours. It shattered previous records, and amazingly, that record still stands today.
My grandfather, when the ship did officially break the record, he was up on the bridge with the captain and with some other dignitaries, and he was so proud. He told a reporter, "I've dreamed of this moment for 40 years." And I think it was the high point of his entire life.
But the age of the cruise liner was coming to an end. Boeing and the Douglas Aircraft Company had made transatlantic travel cheap and fast. The SS United States was decommissioned in 1969, eventually ending up here, in Philadelphia's Pier 82, where the Conservancy preserves its history.
The ship has captured the imagination, certainly not just of me, of just thousands and thousands of people who don't want to see her go down. It's something entirely unique and evokes so much American history that it would just be so tragic for it to disappear.
Today, the SS United States is the most visible legacy of a man who transformed American seafaring.
William Francis Gibbs was one of the most important engineers in American history, and yet his name is mostly forgotten today. This ship was Gibbs' dream from a very young age, and it took him the length of almost an entire career as a shipbuilder before he got a chance to see it come alive.
He was ultimately trying to create the perfect ship. He used that phrase, the perfect ship, a symbol connecting this country with the rest of the world. So yes, I think he accomplished his goal.
"30 miles from the Great Lakes, a former go-to destination was abandoned when a new law transformed America."
So we're in northern Michigan, center of the Great Lakes, few miles from the border of Canada, which means the winters get pretty cold.
There's a network of roads and various buildings, but they're in some state of decay.
Hundreds of buildings lay empty. One is larger than the rest.
One of the buildings is much larger than all the others. It's painted this brilliant green color, and it's sitting beside the lake, which is now frozen.
Vestiges of small-town America mark where people used to gather.
Elsewhere, there's a small shop that clearly closed some time ago. Perhaps it was one of the last businesses left standing?
These buildings are what's left of a thriving community that sought peace and prosperity. But 6 decades ago, a turning point in American history drove the people away. This land was once home to hundreds of people. Blair Evans is part of a small community that remains.
We moved back here 2 years ago and have been here full-time since, but I've been involved in the community a lot for, my entire life.
Decades ago, thousands of people would make the journey to northern Michigan. Most were drawn to one wooden building by the roadside.
This was a major hub of activity, day and night. This area was just extraordinarily active.
This is the Flamingo Club, a music hall for some of the biggest stars of the 1950s. The Four Tops, Sam Cooke, and Sammy Davis Jr. They all came to perform at Idlewild.
What Idlewild is definitely a multifaceted question. And so what Idlewild is in the minds of people who are familiar with the institution of Idlewild and the myth of Idlewild is a kind of oasis.
There was hunting, there was fishing, there was boating, there was swimming. Everything that people might want to do on an all-American vacation.
Tens of thousands of holidaymakers flocked to this country resort in northern Michigan. To some, Idlewild went by another name. They called it Black Eden. Blair Evans was just a boy when famous musicians came here.
Actually, there were a couple doors to kind of peek in, depending upon how knowledgeable you were of the operations. There was also a door in the back. Yeah, we had been known to sneak past the first line of defense and trying to take a peek and see what folks were doing.
But Idlewild was unique among resorts. Since the 1930s, it was one of the few safe havens for Black Americans, even in the integrated North.
One thing about segregation in the South is that it was mandated by law, but in the North, you had separation by custom, by practice. And so in the North, blacks and whites, for example, would live in largely separate neighborhoods. The children would go to separate schools. What happened in reality was that separate was rarely equal.
When Black Americans faced racism, some entrepreneurs saw an opportunity to make money.
Idlewild was actually started by 4 white entrepreneurs. They possibly had a moral purpose behind their enterprise, but they also realized the potential to tap into the Black dollar.
Idlewild was probably the most popular vacation destination for African American families.
It is said that there'd be 25,000 people here on a weekend, which is just an absurd number of folks. People from Chicago, Indianapolis, Detroit, all the cities around would really come into the area. So it was really huge during that time period.
I always wanted to go to Idlewild to see what it looked like as a vacation spot, as a resort, as a town. I just wanted to see what the community looked and felt like.
But for some, Idlewild was more than a summer retreat. It became a place for Black business to thrive. Herman and Leela Wilson were some of the first settlers.
They live right across the street, and that small garage you can see right behind it is actually where their grocery store started.
The Wilsons sold holiday homes, and built a store to provide for the residents.
They started a small setup in the little garage attached to their house and really discovered that there was a need. I mean, as far as groceries are concerned, you could get pretty much everything you needed here.
But now, businesses like Wilson's and the Flamingo Club are closed. Rows of holiday homes are empty. Guest numbers plummeted in the summer of 1964.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a high point of the civil rights movement, and it removed key barriers that African Americans face. So it meant greater mobility, access, and opportunity.
What that does is it sets the table for Black folk no longer wanting to just live in the Black community. Now, people are like, no, we no longer need the safe haven that this place once provided. We feel empowered and emboldened to go to some of these white places now.
Black Americans flocked to vacation spots all across the United States. Idlewild's unique selling point had gone.
Everybody went and explored everything, and that's perfectly understandable. And Las Vegas started pulling a lot of acts. Atlantic City started pulling a lot of acts. They had access to capital that entrepreneurs in Idlewild did not have.
By the end of the 60s, Idlewild had only a fraction of the guests it once had. The heady days as America's Black Eden were over.
We in America of African descent wear a mask. We have two faces. We have the face for white America that we put forward, then we have the face that we put forward when we're within our tribe. So at a place like Idlewild, you were with your tribe. So you could let down your guard, you could be authentic, and you could have a deep sigh of relief.
For 6 decades, people like Blair have kept the resort open, keeping the flame lit at America's Black Eden.
There really is an amazing depth of self-reliance, entrepreneurship, self-determination that really emerged in this place when it wasn't in other places. And I think that can point us towards a lot of possibilities for the future, in addition to kind of understanding the past.
In Marin County, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, is a site that helped usher in a new era in the way America and the world communicated.
This is such a beautiful part of America with the most amazing views of the Pacific Ocean.
Lots of people pass through this area. Maybe they're on a hike, they're going surfing, but they're completely oblivious to the rich history of this site.
One feature of the landscape that is hard to ignore is a collection of tall, thin masts. But there are other things here that are harder to spot.
Down near the coast, there's this large, abandoned-looking building hidden amongst the trees.
Once upon a time, it concealed a revolutionary machine.
In that far building, it was truly Frankenstein stuff. High voltage, sparks, and it sent an enormous bolt of electricity through that antenna.
And it was called into action on a momentous day.
One of the most dramatic events in American history has a direct link to this site, but it's one that actually gets left out in history lessons.
On the Pacific coast, just north of San Francisco, 2 large buildings stand at either end of a vast plot of land.
One is in serious disrepair. The second one is a gorgeous white Art Deco style building.
You can see the wires coming off the masts and going into the white building, so it's beginning to become clear that this is some sort of radio communication site.
Written on one side is RCA Communications, Inc., the Radio Corporation of America. They built this communications hub between 1929 and 1931.
Inside, you've got these old machines that are still working and humming away.
It's kind of this, treasure trove of old radio tech, which is really cool.
But the story here begins in the fields to the northeast, with the few remaining pieces of a pioneering structure.
In the early teens of the last century, nothing that we see behind us existed, but they decided this was the spot that they would build their radio station.
Richard Dillman, chief operator of today's station, knows how to untangle the old from the new.
What we see here is the base of one of the antenna masts that were here in this field. We see how big it was in diameter, and it was 300 feet tall, and it was just one of 9 of these massive structures.
These giant towers with these concrete foundations, and they're huge and impressive, but they're just there to support the cable, which is actually how the messages are transmitted.
The company in charge of the site was owned by one of the most celebrated scientists of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Guglielmo Marconi.
Marconi was an engineer, inventor, and entrepreneur, and eventual Nobel Prize-winning scientist. One of his greatest contributions to science was he discovered how to send and receive Morse code without wires.
So this wireless technology was revolutionary, and it paved the way for all the technology that we see before us now. The little devices that we now carry with us everywhere, as a matter of course, all have their roots in the technology that was pioneered here at this site.
The original antennas at Bolinas were erected by Marconi in 1914, with the purpose of sending Morse code messages wirelessly across the Pacific. But this site was part of something even bigger, a global long-wave radio network.
The plan was to have several high-powered stations that would sort of girdle the world and basically provide instantaneous communication from any point across the globe.
The antennas were just one piece of the puzzle. It was only when they were hooked up to the building nearer the coast that their full potential was realized.
This building today is in a sad state of disrepair. Few people know it's here, and fewer still know what it was for. But in fact, it played a significant role in Marconi's plan for global communications.
This building was the powerhouse of the transmitting antennae that was outside.
To transmit signals over the vast distances that Marconi wanted, a huge amount of energy needed to be generated.
This is the beating heart of the Marconi transoceanic transmitting system. We're standing right here where this machinery was located, and it was enormous, loud, dangerous, high-voltage equipment.
Once the powerful primary signal had been produced, it was then tuned before being sent along cables to the antenna field, where it would then be broadcast.
One of the main destinations for these communications was another Marconi station on Hawaii.
Hawaii is the gateway radio communication to the rest of the world. So if you get to Hawaii, you can get everywhere else.
But just 9 years into the life of the Bolinas long-wave radio station, Marconi made a scientific breakthrough that had major consequences.
In 1923, he developed a shortwave beam system. This had many advantages over the long-wave system.
Shortwave was much more power efficient, had far higher quality, and could travel much further distances.
The arrival of shortwave technology is kind of the beginning of the end of the original transmitting station. It wasn't set up to take advantage of this new wave that was coming through.
A newer station further inland was built, leaving this one overshadowed.
The original transmitting station fell largely into disuse, but it wasn't completely shut down.
The new technology, the shortwave technology, worked great, but it was fickle. The old technology was solid. It was there all the time. It might have been slow and it might have been expensive, but it always got through.
And in 1941, the trustworthy Bolinas transmitting station stepped up when America was on the brink of catastrophe.
In the latter months of 1941, it became apparent that there might be a conflict in the Pacific between America and the Empire of Japan.
On December 7th at 12:48 p.m. in Washington, General Marshall ordered the following message to be sent to Hawaii immediately. The Japanese are presenting at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today what amounts to an ultimatum. Just what significance the hour set may have, we do not know, but be on alert accordingly.
Marshall intended to send the message via the Army radio, but the shortwave transmission failed due to atmospheric conditions.
The Army radio system was not up to the job, but they knew that this antique technology would get the message across, and that's how the message was sent through this building to Hawaii.
They were in urgent need of a powerful long-wave transmitter, and Bolinas stepped in to save the day.
The message arrived at 7:33 a.m. Honolulu time. The attack began 22 minutes later. But for some reason, the message wasn't flagged as urgent and wasn't decoded and delivered to the Pacific Fleet HQ for another 7 hours.
So it arrived on the desks of Admiral Kimmel and General Short as the Japanese planes were retreating towards their carriers, and they did not get the message in time. There's a great unanswered mystery. The priority stamp was not put on that message.
More than 2,400 Americans died in the attack and another 1,000 people were wounded. But how much difference it would have made if the message was read earlier is questionable.
Admiral Kimmel and General Short were under very strict orders about what they could do in the way of preparation to avoid the appearance of a panic on the island. So how much of a change it would have made, that's open to debate.
In the decades following World War II, both buildings were refitted with newer transmitters before finally ceasing operations in the 1970s. The Bolinas site sat empty and neglected for years until a group of radio enthusiasts paid a visit and were astounded with their discovery.
In 1999, members of the newly formed Maritime Radio Historical Society visited the site and found a time capsule.
New life has now been breathed into the station.
12 transmitters are on the air every Saturday here, and they're used to broadcast marine weather and news in Morse.
It's a ship-to-shore communication station now, and we're operating this station just as it always has. Tradition is enormously important to us.
The original transmitting building is now in the process of being restored, so more people can appreciate its little-known World War II story.
That building is the locus of a very important element in communications history, political history, and military history for the United States of America.
In the Prairie State, near the Mississippi River, is an ancient wonder, hidden in plain sight.
We're just outside St. Louis, and it's calm, it's quiet, it feels natural, but in reality, it's not natural at all.
Across this landscape, mounds erupt from the ground.
When you start to look around and see the sheer number of these mounds, but also the shape, it becomes clear that these were made by humans.
You get the sense that each one is hiding some kind of secrets about the site. And that must mean that the biggest mound of them all must hold the greatest secret of all.
Well, ahead of us, we can see a large earthen structure that was built by the American Indians here, and it's the center of the site.
Dating back over 1,000 years, this was once the focal point of an ancient civilization.
It was the largest prehistoric American Indian settlement north of Mexico.
But despite its significance, many have never heard of this place.
There is a huge road that runs right through the center of this site. If somebody was driving down this road, they probably wouldn't have any idea that they were driving through one of the most important sites in America.
Known as Monk's Mound, this vast man-made structure dominates the site.
Where we're standing is the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas, the largest totally earthen mound built by ancient people in the Western Hemisphere.
Bill Eisminger spent 50 years as the site's archaeologist and curator.
The base of it covers over 14 acres, and it stands 100 feet high, has several different terraces. We're standing on the first terrace, and there's 2 levels up on top and a smaller terrace off on the west side.
We look at our cities, including nearby St. Louis, and we see tall buildings. But incredibly, this human-made structure was the tallest structure in the United States into the mid-19th century.
This lower terrace would have held a number of structures, but a large building atop the mound was the focal point.
We found evidence of a huge building. It was over 100 feet long, almost 50 feet wide, and maybe 30, 40 feet tall originally. It probably had multiple functions, but this was the seat of religious and political power and authority.
Built by a people known as the Mississippians, this great mound was the heart of an ancient city, Cahokia.
This culture existed largely between 800 and 1500 AD, but it's really 1,000 years ago when the peak of this site actually was.
But while this may have been the seat of power, archaeological finds elsewhere reveal another side to this civilization.
The mounds weren't all necessarily meant to be built upon. Some of them hide a darker secret.
The main site of Cahokia stretched across roughly 6 square miles. Today, 80 of the original 120 mounds remain.
It's important to understand that there were no domesticated animals, so everything from the digging to carrying the soil to dropping it in different sites, this was all done by people.
We've got a variety of artifacts that are representative of the Mississippian culture. One of the more notable ones is this item we call a hoe. Well, this is what they used to dig the dirt to build these mounds.
For the last century, excavations have been undertaken, and slowly, they've revealed a picture of this sophisticated, hierarchical society.
So there's clues in everything we find, even the soil itself, the pollen grains in the soil tell us something about the vegetation and the kinds of plants that were around and growing, the kinds of food they were eating. In the garbage pits, we find a lot of the animal bone, so we know that they're doing a lot of fishing. Anything we find gives us a little bit of more insights into what daily life was like here at Cahokia.
As the site grew, so too did the population. From around 1050 AD, it went from just a couple of thousand inhabitants to somewhere between 10 and 20,000 half a century later.
We're standing in the Grand Plaza right now, and we're at the southern end of it. It covers almost 40 acres and would be used as a public gathering place for ceremonies and rituals and games and markets and other kinds of public activities. At around 1100 AD, Cahokia would have been larger than London and maybe even Paris. People don't often realize that we had something that big here in America.
But while this city radiated power and authority, by no means was it free from troubles.
We know from the digs around here that there actually was a fence, so to speak, that was about 2 miles in circumference that surrounded the key central part of the city.
It also indicates that warfare and conflict was a common part of Mississippian culture by this time. And we see not just Cahokia, but a lot of other Mississippian sites are being fortified as well.
Yet while warring neighbors may have been the greatest threat to the city's inhabitants, before the walls were built, evidence found at the site points to the fact that for some, the dangers were closer to home.
There is suggestion that perhaps they practiced human sacrifices because underneath some of the mounds had been found victims of appalling injuries.
In the site named Mound 72, a 1967 excavation revealed a possible burial of a leader and the remains of numerous individuals likely from the nearby area.
There was one pit that had 53 women in it, all about 15 to 25 years old. Apparently had been sacrificed. Next to them were 4 men that had their heads and their hands cut off, apparently in some ritual. It's really not been found at other places, throughout the Midwest, that kind of burial treatment, the mass sacrifices and things. So something was different going on then, but that's not typical of most Mississippian places.
Whatever these mass burials signified, the greatest mystery remains. Why did the population begin to disappear from around 1200 AD?
So it could have been a number of things that contributed to its decline. Perhaps political unrest, drought, famine, disease.
The answers are out there, but with archaeology, it's a long process. The answers are literally in the ground. They're there, but they must be discovered.
While many questions about Cahokia remain, the site still offers up much to learn from.
Looking at lost cities and declined civilizations like this is powerful and resonant in the present because it reminds us of the fragility and vulnerability of our own cities, our own settlements in the present day. And perhaps that can provoke us to take a bit more care with our environments and safeguarding the future.